Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Movies and TVs on the Ball. And I'm feeling excited today because both X-Men 97 has just dropped on Disney Plus, and this gives us a chance to talk about the X-Men series, which we are a fan of. We actually covered in one of our videos, Night of the Sentinel,
right,
on
in a previous episode.
Everybody, my name is Steve.
And I'm Jay.
And I'm Jay. Oh, and he's Jay.
No, I'm Jay. You're Steve.
And I'm Steve. And so we just found out, since X-Men 97 came out, we decided that we were going to kind of look at just the X-Men movies today. We've actually got a special thing coming next Saturday night, or is it Friday night?
Yeah, next Saturday at Central Cinema.
At Central Cinema, which is a sort of the kind of
independent
theater that's in our hometown. That they're gonna they're doing an X2 screening with the screenwriter.
Well, actually, I think he wrote some of the comics. Maybe
he wrote the comics,
or
so
some of them.
He's got a connection with the X-Men. He's got a tie-in with the X-Men stuff,
right? And I think he'll also be showing some of the animated series too.
And I think he's going to be showing some of the animated series. We're not really sure what, but I figured this would be kind of a fun. And since X-Men 97 came out, I decided, why not we look at the first X-Men movie and talk about it. Jay, so, X-Men for me, I guess, what was it like, we talked about, I guess, what was it like for you to, growing up with the X-Men?
Yeah.
Were you, was the animated thing, or did you ever read the comics, or how were you kind of
I did catch some of the animated show, but not super, super often. It was always sort of like a treat when I was able to catch it on the TV. I don't think I was too dumb to figure out like when it came on.
Okay, well, it kind of, well, for me, it was kind of in the same way with Power Rangers. It was on Fox Kids. So it was one of those, it was on the Saturday morning lineup.
Right.
Now, I did get for Easter, Christmas one year, they had the pilot episode of the first try of X-Men called X-Men Pride of the X-Men.
Right.
Which was Wolverine, who was really Australian.
Right.
Which is ironic because they cast an Australian to play Hugh Jackman.
Right.
But like he had a super Australian accent, and it was like Magneto was on base M, and it was, I think a little bit of a tie-on. Do you tie into?
Is that the one that was out on the asteroid?
The asteroid,
yeah.
And that was the one. It was kind of a tie-in with the arcade, if you remember the arcade, big arcade,
like the
game.
4-player one.
Yeah.
It
was like you were like, X-Men, or I think you were like Wolverine, and all you could do is just slash.
Right.
And Magneto, or no, you fought Magneto, but you had like Cyclops. And Cyclops was in that blue kind of suit.
Right.
He didn't really have sort of the X-Men.
Yeah, I think that's the one, sort of critique I have for the they're all like, I would enjoy more color, I feel like.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
But that's how I kind of, that's kind of was my kind of real first impression of the X-Men. 'Cause that was like in the 87 or 89 when that came out.
Gotcha.
So, and it was one of those things you could rent from Blockbuster Video, I think, at the time. So, but when but 90s is when I kind of got into the X-Men.
Right.
And just that,
such a good theme song.
Good theme song, and of course, and each of the characters, but the characters were written so well.
Yeah.
And I think you really, and I think what was interesting is Bibbs and Whitney, the guys that do Cancel Too Soon, did an episode on the X-Men, the pilot episode,
right,
of the 80s pilot episode, And he said, and this is what I really think why the X-Men have stayed so long is he said, anybody that's ever felt ostracized or like a loser or whatever, can always relate to the X-Men.
Right, that's true.
That's the greatness of the X-Men. But I loved, X-Men was one of those shows that I would watch. It was the Saturday morning cartoon that I would watch every Saturday morning. It kind of rolled with the Power Rangers. I read the comics. I remember getting I remember a comic book section where it was like I found it in a gas station.
Okay, gotcha.
Like Cyclops and Phoenix, and it was Jean Grey as the Phoenix, and I think the Phoenix saga was still going on. It was just kind of ending. This is like 97 when the comic came out. I just remember it was that kind of thing, and because that's the thing, X-Men to me, I've always sort of I've always been a huge fan of X-Men movies and TV shows as well. Jay, what was your sort of I mean, did you,
the comic side? I probably ran in. My first experience with the comic was I found it just someone had in their drawer an old I think it was we were on vacation somewhere, and just a couple. There were comics of Cable.
Cable, yeah, and Cable.
And it took me a while to realize it was an X because it was just sort of not the familiar characters I was used to because it's all the time travel.
Was it X-Force?
I don't know.
Because I remember that I had one comic called X-Force, and it had Sunspot or Sun.
Okay.
And Sunspot was this sort of he's kind of like Marvel's Human Torch, or not Marvel's, X-Men's Human Torch. But I don't know exactly what was all retconned or anything like that. But
you can't remember the details. It's only just
of course, my favorite one was Gambit. Gambit was always cool, and and I feel like they had such colorful characters. Now, my cousin Bo, he was huge X-Men fan back in the 90s.
Yeah. And
he had I remember it was the Mr. Sinister section of the episodes.
Right.
But they were, because I actually owned some of them. They would package them as video cassettes. Collect all 4 video cassettes.
Right.
And it's each of them is a 20-minute episode. And one of them was the Mr. Sinister kind of showing up, but it was the way it was packaged. It was completely dark, black,
Ooh,
kind of like a special
right.
case for it. But I remember that. I remember the X-Men movie. The movies to me just hit me right. But I kind of look at X-Men, now. It'd be interesting talking to somebody who grew up on Iron Man.
How does it compare?
How does it compare? Where I feel but in the same way, if you look at the X-Men movies going into that, the films sort of had to really, I think, try. They were really in sort of trying to figure out their stuff.
Right.
They were trying to figure out their kind of ways, because you had Blade. Blade was really the first one that kind of could crawl, and then X-Men kind of took the baton. And X-Men the movie kind of felt like a gamble, but it was so cool.
Which one came out first, this or Spider-Man?
X-Men came out first.
Oh, okay.
Because X-Men came out in 2000, Spider-Man came out in 2002.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, because I think Spider-Man was still in developmental hell. I think they wanted to release one in '98. James Cameron wanted to, but James Cameron wanted to, but it fell through. But what was, I guess what I was gonna say is did you, because and then I watched this animated show, and then I think X-Men Evolutions was sort of a tie-in to the movie. It wasn't a tie-in, but it came out right around the same time as the movie.
Yeah, ish, I think, yeah.
And it was like kind of, it dealt more with the high school feel.
Like,
and that was one thing Bryan Singer said is like, you know, in a lot of the comics, it's like, it's a school for gifted youngsters, but in the comics and stuff, you never saw it as a school. You always saw it as like, that's just their training facility. So we're going to look at X-Men the movie. Jay, what was your before we start, how do you feel about this movie?
From what I remember, I don't think it was my favorite, but I still I feel like Magneto and Xavier are just really powerful. Just throughout this whole film series,
they're very powerful, but I also kind of think that they have a very. It's not a villain hero. You know, it's not like ha ha ha. I know when we talked about Smallville, I felt like it had that. You know, I think nowadays your villain has to have more depth than just ha ha ha. I'm going to rob a bank. Ha ha ha.
Right.
I'm going to, poison the water supply.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's not. I mean, but it's more of. It's more of a. But there's more of an in depth to it, like.
Right.
Luke, like kind of, when we talked about Smallville, Lex Luthor really, you see the fall of kind of going from a decent person to the villain we love at all. But one thing that I did like, and we'll talk about more in detail in X2 is in X-Men 3, if we ever get to X-Men 3, there's that scene where Charles Xavier blows up.
Oh, right, yeah.
And Pyro, they're walking back to the base. And Pyro says, if you would have given me the chance, I would have killed the old man myself. And Magneto throws him against the wall and says, if, Charles Xavier did more for mutant kind than you will ever know. My only regret was that he is what he is. He didn't see the dream realized.
Right.
So anyway, that's our kind of take on the X-Men, kind of where we're standing with the X-Men. We're going to watch the movie and tell you our thoughts. Alrighty. Stay tuned. Alright guys, we're back. We just got out of X-Men, the 2000 film directed by Bryan Singer. So Jay, what did you think now watching it?
I guess I hadn't seen that movie
years later.
Yeah, I've seen it sooner than that, but
yeah.
It's probably been maybe 10 years. It was a lot better than I remembered.
It is. I mean, I was watching the Nostalgia Critic do a review of the X-Men movies for he called it, because every March he does like a monthly series where he does movies or he does like a series of 4 weeks of like a movie series
right
thing. And they were talking about it, and I think the problem is that the generation after us who grew up on the Iron Man movies and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think sort of takes for granted how much I mean, I say that Marvel needs to do a lot of we're getting superhero fatigued, but I think that you have to, if you talk to somebody who was 10 when Iron Man came out, growing up on stuff is different. Now I liked X-Men, watching it the first time.
Right.
First time in when I was 12, I was really jazzed for it, just to see. It's finally we get to see X-Men on the big screen. Kind of thing. I think I saw it the first time at the Dollar Theater.
Okay.
So X-Men, what I liked about X-Men is that it starts out with
Germany, with
Poland or Germany?
Yeah, with the Nazis.
With the Nazis,
it's a concentration
and
camp.
What we see is them they're moving all these Jews into a concentration camp.
Yeah.
And I like how you're kind of like, okay, I think for people who, I'm like going, okay, this is interesting.
Uh-huh.
And they move them into the concentration camp. And as they're moving into the concentration camp, this kid is separated from his mother.
Right.
And they try to move him away. And I like how it starts where it pretty much, he grabs it and, it's sort of like, he starts crying to his mother. And
right.
And I like what, with a lot of Marvel film, or like mutants sort of don't know how did I get my power, it's the teen adolescence
right.
kind of thing. And he's moving and he starts moving, moving the
gate.
The gate. And the
right.
gate moves and they're trying to hold him back, but he's just too powerful, and then they hit him in the head with a
butt of a gun. Right.
And I thought that was a really interesting opening, kind of like just to kind of get the backstory of Magneto
right.
at the beginning. Now in X-Men First Class, we see the results of what's happened
right.
to Magneto in that one, where it actually showed the first scene.
Right.
I think they maybe edited it a little bit, but we see the young kid go to see Kevin Bacon's character, and Kevin Bacon basically says, oh, do you want some chocolate? And it sort of rolls, they kind of, this is what happens after the events of the Holocaust scene.
Right.
And what was your thoughts on it?
I guess it's a good scene. It just shows like the the trauma that Magneto's gone through and stuff, and
why he hates humanity. Well,
or he just hates like the whole idea of the Mutant Registration Act that they're trying to pass. Because that sort of is a throwback to like how the Nazi Germany.
I've never kind of noticed that since watching it, and then we kind of flash forward to the not too distant future. It's never really like any year. It's always the not too distant future.
Right.
And what I liked is we see Rogue, and Rogue is sort of like this sort of teen, and she's got a boyfriend named Cody, and which was in the animated series. Like I remember watching Rogue's backstory where she says, oh, it's my boyfriend. I had my first boyfriend, my first kiss.
Right.
And I nearly, but I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's not, it's not exactly what it is, but she ends up kissing him, and him, it ends up taking the life force and
right. Yeah.
And I liked what they did. See, I think in this one, I liked how it was sort of veiny when we see
Rogue's
power being used. We see the veining, the kind of like the
right.
vein, and then that. And then, I like how it's that teen angst.
Right. It's just showing like another, like, the heightened teenage state is normal when it activates their power.
But it's activating the powers.
Yeah.
And she's like, get an ambulance. She's get away from me. And I kind of feel like it sort of breaks. And I do like how in this movie, watching it again, it sort of breaks down where each character is coming from.
Right.
Now I know like Professor Xavier is more of that's more. We see more of that in First Class, but I feel like this one does pretty good. Deals with it, and then I like the senator. Let's talk about the senator or the mutant registration hearing. I liked how it was the not too distant future. How they kind of saw like, it's futuristic, but not like super advanced kind of thing. And then we see Jean Grey, and Jean Grey is basically talking about. I like how Jean Grey is talking about the mutant mutants need to be, are set with fear and all this stuff, and fear and isolation, and they're closeted, which is sort of. I think in the sequel, which we'll get to next week, there's that line where she says, "Won't you stop being a mutant?" And it's a very, gay, coming out
Yeah, there's lots of allegories you can take away
allegories
from
for that. Take away
mutants.
from that.
Yeah.
But what do you think of Senator Kelly? I think we'll talk about Senator Kelly and Jean Grey's sort of battle on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. I guess I'm not super. I know you said he plays a bigger role in like the animated series and stuff.
Yeah. Like I think he in the animated series, I think he is more of like I think the first season, it's sort of the mutants need to be completely mutants. We don't need mutant. He is that same kind of character where he's
right.
The mutant killer kind of not mutant killer, but and then kind of changes his rounds.
Oh, gotcha.
In the series, and I think in this one it is kind of deals with that. He is played by the guy from you saw him in Summer Catch. He is. I mean, I knew him as Senator Kelly.
Okay.
But
yeah, I'm not sure what else he's been in.
He's been in. He's been in. He's Bruce Davidson. You know him from such film. I mean, he's been a working actor. I saw him in Summer Catch is one of his films. He was in Designated Survivor, and he was also in La La Land.
Okay.
To name a few. But I knew when I see him, I'm always like, oh yeah, it's Senator Kelly. So he's saying, he's asking the question, are mutants dangerous? And I like how it gets political, but it doesn't get it's never one-sided, don't you think? I mean, it is one-sided, but it doesn't they don't I feel like if they would do it now, they would have hammered that whole thing in a little bit more. I mean, they do it lightly. They could have done it a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty playing against people's fears to manipulate them. Yeah.
And I like how he says, I have a list of mutants that are, and I like how he goes through the list of mutants, and he says, and there's this girl who can walk through walls, Kitty Pryde.
Right.
Who, if you've seen the 1980s X-Men series that we kind of brushed up on, is sort of really the Jubilee in that one, kind of in the animated series.
Oh yeah.
That one from the 80s. But
right.
Anyway, Kitty Pryde, he says, who goes into the bank vault, or go, and then he does say, what about people, then there are mutants that can read our minds. And I like when he says it, it's, he says it, it's more of the, talk, and Jean Grey, and he says, giving away our God free will, and which is, I think, an interesting question.
Yeah.
But I like how he's saying that when Professor Xavier.
Yeah, I think I use that sort of introduce Professor Xavier.
And Jean Grey as well.
Right.
So and then and then there is that Magneto and Professor Xavier. Magneto leaves after the do you want to see your kids with mutants and hanging out with mutants and
right.
That kind of thing. And Magneto leaves, and Professor Xavier basically says, what are you doing here, Charles? And he's like, or what are you doing here, Eric? And he's like, Charles, I'm looking for, why are you asking the questions you already know the answer to? And what did you think of that, Xavier? Because I know in a lot of iterations, it's a Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X
right.
allegory as well. What
right.
was your thoughts on
I thought they
Magneto and Xavier? And,
I think they did a really good job in these films.
Yeah, and I liked how they kind of. I think what's interesting about Magneto in this one is that I think he plays it more as. I think he plays it half and half, with kind of as a kind of not a Doctor Evil, but main villain.
Yeah, definitely. He has
thing.
like
but yet he has
a master plan.
But he has like I think kind of they have a mutual respect
right
for each other. But that we really kind of see more in the sequels,
right?
Especially 2 and 3. And so anyway, he's like, I'm looking for hope, and Magneto says, I'll give you hope, young man. Just old man, I just want one thing in return: stay out of my way. And I like that, and I love his saying, "What's your thoughts on we are the future, Charles, not them. They no longer matter." What was your thoughts? I mean, like I thought that was really profound not profound, but at least interesting.
Yeah.
Because I'm also looking at this, I think it's looking at X-Men as a 12-year-old. I was like, oh, this is great. But then I could kind of going back, I could see like, okay, when are we going to get to, the action? I want to see Wolverine and stuff.
Right.
And then, so basically, then we have, and after he walks off, then we get Rogue's story. She's traveled from, she's kind of gone on a journey to Canada, and I think it's Lofton City. And what was interesting is I listened to the director's commentary.
Right.
The voice of Beast from the 90s show.
I remember he said that was the truck driver?
Was the truck driver, because if you remember, he says, I thought you were going to take me to Lofton City. He says, this is Lofton City.
Right.
And then I like how, and then we got an intro to Wolverine. But what was your take on Magneto's and Professor X relationship in this film?
I liked it.
Or at least the beginning.
Yeah. It's interesting story. Like, they're not like immediately like fighting each other, but they're more like, like what plans do you have going on? It's more like respectful
it's not. They're more respectful, and I think there's more of. It's not like Xavier did this. Xavier, it's not like this. Oh, ha ha! Here's my evil plan. I mean,
right.
He has a reason for doing his plan. It's
right.
Not like
they just have different sort of
ideologies, and I like how it works. So I liked how, and it's just so cool. Like, here's like, so where I was going with this is, so she goes into the bar after getting kicked out of the truck driver. Getting kicked out by Beast, the truck driver. And she goes into a bar, and she basically says, can I get, she sees, like, there's a cage fight going on.
Right.
Which I think, I sometimes look at it and says, is that an homage to Fight Club?
I don't know.
I don't know, but that would always give me kind of like, so she's like, and then you have
I've never been to a bar in Canada. I don't know if that's how it is.
I don't know, but he says, I like how she kind of walks in, and he's like, in all my years, I've never seen anybody like this, and I like, and like how, and they're carrying off a guy, and it kind of reminds me of that scene in Spider-Man when
with Bonesaw.
No, he's walking through the thing, and you see the guy on the stretcher. He goes, my leg, and he's just, but it's a lot slower, slower. But he's like, in all my years, I have never seen anything like it. And Wolverine's just sitting there, and he's like, and I like how it's sort of mysterious,
right?
And then you have the guy.
Except he has the Wolverine hair.
And so he does. Yes, he does. I mean, from frame one, you kind of like, it's perfect casting.
Yeah, that's a pretty good cast. Yeah.
I mean, no, perfect casting for Wolverine.
Right.
And so so there's this guy, and he says, I'll fight him. And I love that line. I thought it was kind of a nice line. He says, anything goes. And the guy puts the mic and says, anything goes, except don't hit him in the balls. He says, you'll take it personal. And he's like, and then he's like, and I like how Wolverine, like, he first gets kicked, beat up by this guy.
Uh-huh.
And then the first hit, you hear the clank of the metal where he's like about to punch him.
Crushes his hand.
And then he just takes his, like,
headbutts him.
Headbutts him, and you hear the clink and clunk.
Yeah, they really like sold like he's just like a metal skeleton.
And I think it's interesting because like
with the sound effects.
Because I was 12
Uh-huh.
when this movie came out, and you were what, 10?
Yeah, probably 10.
10 or 9. Yeah. We're 2 years different.
Yeah, so I would have been like around 10 or 9.
10 or 9.
Yeah.
So, what was it like, kind of seeing Wolverine? I mean, I think, like I said, growing up with the cinematic universe and the Marvel films, we take seeing all these characters kind of not for granted, but it's not as epic.
Right.
You know, we have to look back and go, God, we saw Wolverine, like seeing Wolverine in.
Yeah, I think when I remember, like when I very first saw this movie, being somewhat, because I probably like didn't care anything about the plot, and just like, there wasn't a whole lot of like fighting.
Yeah. But
I think like it's a good movie now, like looking back on it.
But just seeing Wolverine, and it's like from frame one, we knew Hugh Jackman.
Right.
And I don't think anybody is ever going to. It's gonna be kind of. I always kind of compare it to, like, I just kind of came up with this theory or this way of looking at it is, Wolverine is like the energetic claw that Jim Carrey does in Liar Liar, like how he like goes, "It's the claw,"
right,
and does that. And I'm moving my hand like this, and then remember when he meets? You've seen Liar Liar, haven't you?
Yeah.
Remember when Cary Ellis plays the boyfriend of his ex-wife?
Oh, and he tries to do the claw.
Like, it's the claw!
And he just does like a little...
I feel like that's the same thing with Wolverine, where I feel like anybody that's going to take the mantle of Wolverine is going to be it's the claw, unless he can like go, oh, well, kind of in the way we looked at Spider-Man and go, well, they bring something, he brings something different and fresh. Not fresh, but something that doesn't tarnish, or it's kind of like the Batman kind of thing.
Which one Wolverine is it where they go back like to the Civil War and stuff? I forget. That's like a montage in X-Men Origins. X-Men Origins, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
okay. I was trying to just couldn't remember.
And I mean, X-Men Origins, I felt like was alright. I thought it had more interesting thoughts, but it wasn't It's one of those ones that like they just didn't execute it as well. But that was kind of like the thing I liked about this one was like we get to see Wolverine on the screen,
right?
And then I think a lot of people, like, I was listening to a guy review the X-Men movies and talked about Rogue and how Rogue was
Did you what?
Did I already mention Rogue was like Jubilee?
No. Yeah.
So Rogue in the comics was a lot more
sort of mature and like power. She was like,
she's powerful, but she's got spunk, she's got attitude.
Right.
And Jubilee was more of
like the really young teenager.
Right. And I think they kind of made Rogue into the really young teenager.
Right.
Because Rogue in the comics didn't fly until she took Miss Marvel's. She held on to Miss Marvel, and I think just drained her powers. Right. And that's how she got the flight and the strength and stuff. Right. And that's how I kind of knew Rogue. And I was a little bit. I look at it. If I looked at it as a 12-year-old, and then after watching all the X-Men, I was like, why the hell isn't Rogue not flying? Right. What's your thoughts on Rogue in this one? I guess since we're kind of talking about Rogue.
I liked her. You sort of see like the, how she sort of struggles with her power, just trying to find a place to belong with. I thought it was good. I thought, they sort of like had to fit a lot into this, so they didn't have a whole lot of time to develop characters. They crammed it a lot. Right. I think they did a decent job for the amount of time they had.
Well, I think Bryan Singer, it was directed by Bryan Singer. Right. And Bryan Singer did The Usual Suspects. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Probably.
But it's one of those movies where it has a lot of characters. Right. And he can I think that's his strong point, is that he can balance out a lot of characters and give them, it's not this, I'll give you an example of doing it well, as in Bryan Singer doing it and really giving each character a chance to kind of breathe and be its own character, giving them enough time. But if you look at it, it's not this sort of like when you look at the Justice League, or at least not the Snyder Cut, but or Batman v Superman, it's the hello, I'm Aqua, like kind of like what, hello, I'm Aquaman, hello, I'm Wonder, it's this, but he really takes it and gives them at least 3 minutes to be a hero, show kind of their powers,
right?
Which we'll see when we get to the
Cyclops and Storm,
and stuff like that. And so anyway, I like how he wins the fight, and Rogue is sitting at the bar. Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
Rogue is sitting at the bar, and that was sort of like, you feel like she was kind of like a pickpocketer or something, because like there's that line where he's like, "You're sticking with water, honey."
Right, and he moves the tip jar away.
Yeah. And then Logan shows up, or Wolverine, and he's got a cigar, and he's like, "I'll have a beer," and then he smokes his cigar, and then they talk about Ellis Island, which has to do with the plot,
right?
And he basically anyway, I like how the two men come in and they say, like, no one takes a hit like that. You owe me $50, man. And It's like, well, if you're gonna, if you ask more, then I'm gonna, you're gonna get less than you bargained for. And then I liked how the the other guy's like, look, Stu, just leave it alone. And then he comes back at him with a knife, and Wolverine shows up and.
The claws.
Yeah. And I like how we get to see the slits.
Right.
Because, when I watched it I didn't know, like, when I was a kid, like, watching it for the first time, I thought the blue, like, I didn't really understand that it was... I thought
part of coming out of a skeleton, yeah.
Within the skeleton, I just thought it was the gloves.
Right.
At the time. Maybe when I, saw the first episode, he needs the gloves. But just to see it, like, slit and come out was just so, it's kind of gross but cool at the same time, and I like how the
it's control,
so close to his throat, and then he says, "Get out of my bar, freak," and the bartender, and then I like how he cuts the
shotgun in
half, and then kind of walks off, and then he drives off, and Rogue gets into
his trailer,
and then, and then he smells her.
That's he either smells or hears like a thump in the back. Yeah.
I can't, because when I watched it for the first time, I always thought, why is he, I didn't kind of put two and two together.
Right.
I mean, I kind of did now, but, two to do together. And he's like, get out of my thing. And, this was their screen test, actually. This whole scene.
Oh, this scene, okay.
Well, not get out of the thing, is like, put your hands on your heat. So he basically... kicks her out of the thing. She's like, I needed my ride. He's just like, I saved your life. And she's got that, you can tell that she's got that Louisiana swing. Or swing.
Accent.
I saved your life. And then
he's like, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't tell that line. So anyway, he just says, he drives off and then stops. He lets him on. Right. And she I kind of noticed in this one, after watching it now, she's kind of nosy. Right.
Well, she's probably like 14 or
yeah,
something.
That's probably true. But I like how she just says, wow. Like, I mean, how insulting can it be where she's like, wow, suddenly my life doesn't seem that bad.
Yeah, looking at his
just
trailer.
Like, well, lady, go, okay, so leave. If you prefer the road. And she's like, no, it's cozy. And then she's like, put your hand, and then he kind of sees that she's rubbing her hands, and then that kind of gives us the sort of, or Logan's perspective of that there's mutants, something that they're mutants, and she's like, don't put your hands on the heater, and then you see a tree come up, and the tree comes down, and Wolverine
flies to the
windshield, which is pretty cool. And he gets and I like how he's like there, and she's like kind of trying to get out of her seatbelt. And he gets up, and he's like, "Kid, are you all?" He cracks his neck, and we see we see him heal for the
Right,
first
his healing
time.
factory. Yeah.
And I thought that was such a cool
Yeah.
effect. I mean, even now it holds up.
It's still pretty good.
And he smells something, and then we get Sabretooth
Right.
comes out of the trees.
Right.
And Sabretooth starts, or he smells something. Sabretooth comes out of the trees, and they fight. And Sabretooth, I feel like he was a latchkey.
Yeah, he doesn't have much character. He's sort of just big and violent and just sort of hits people.
I think, and I think there's more, because I think there's more to Sabretooth. I know especially, and I'm going to look at it with the animated series, is that Sabretooth, he sort of is abandoned by his father, and he's more, his costume is a little bit more, he's kind of got like a shaggy, not shaggy, but like kind of a shag kind of suit. I mean, it's more colorful, of course.
Right.
But he fights him, and so Wolverine is thrown, and he hits the tree, and is knocked out.
Yeah, like Sabretooth pretty much grabs like a tree trunk, like hits him like with a baseball bat.
Knocks him out, and then the snow starts getting higher, and we get to see the introduction of Storm. Storm's eyes are white, and
then I think Cyclops blasts him.
Shows up, and Cyclops blasts him. And I think with the visor, he's got it, because I think in the comics and even in the animated series, he basically uses his. He has to use his. I think he kind of depends, but I know in this one he has to kind of turn it on.
Right.
Because I think it like kind of affects. And I loved what my friend Bibb said when they were talking about Cyclops in the 1980s anime. It's like he has no peripheral vision.
Yeah.
He just has. But I think in the comics they like redid his thing where his whole like suit now is sort of goes around his eyes. Okay. Instead, like it's more like
just a one band.
Well, if you saw remember in X-Men Days of Future Past or one of these, the other one, it's not like like a visor.
It's like
it's
more
a
like
visor,
glasses.
but it's kind of more. No, it's more of a. Yeah, more like those. It's more like those jacket or kind of sunglasses.
Right.
Yeah. Kind of thing. But yeah, I mean that does kind of ask questions. I mean those are like the nerd questions. Kind of like, so let me get this straight. If how does Kevin McAllister's family own that have a house? What does his dad? That kind of question. Right. But I looked at, and so he blasts him, and it's a pretty cool scene. And then the camper starts burning in the fire. Rogue is trying to get out of the seat.
Yeah.
And we see Cyclops turn on his laser or his optic blast, and I mean it's kind of cool. I think now
they do their traditional like hero stuff, and then
and then they rescue him. But I think it's cool. It's just so cool to see Cyclops is. I mean, just seeing the X-Men on the big screen is just something that I'm just like, wow.
Right.
So anyway, so they're delivered. So they're hanging out. They get back to the mansion. The thing explodes. The camper explodes. They get back to the mansion, and Wolverine is now on an operating table.
Right.
And we see Jean Grey do the most laziest thing I've ever seen.
What's that?
With her powers. She doesn't like...
Would you not use your powers?
She uses her powers, but I'm like...
Steve, would you not use your powers if you had powers?
I would. Okay, that does make sense. I would.
Okay.
I would use my powers. I would. But so she's on the
that's how they're introducing her powers. That's how you're doing
operating table. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like. Did you watch the '80s thing?
I watched some of it. Yeah.
The '80s thing, and I'm like going. So it's like, oh, there's a bunch of rocks on the thing. Cyclops, move those, and so he just like moves them, and like they just said, oh, let's get to our Wolverine or Nightcrawler. We can't, so I can understand. Maybe in that perspective.
Right.
So anyway, she uses her
telekinesis
power to like lift up a syringe, and she sticks him with a needle, and I like how when she sticks him with a needle, it's kind of like a mousetrap. It's kind of like a mousetrap, where it's like she sticks him with a needle, and then all of a sudden, Wolverine just gets up and starts choking her.
Right.
And then she starts, he's like, he has no idea, coughing, and then he walks away. And then I like, what do you think of Wolverine walking through the corridors of kind of the...
It's very, felt like a spaceship with all the...
Yeah, it did. And I like how you saw the X's. I think
right.
Bryan Singer always said when you watch it the second or third time, count how many X's there are
right.
in the series. So Wolverine goes, and then he finds an elevator. He goes up the elevator.
Right, and he's hearing Professor X in his head.
No, he's hearing Professor, and it's like, where are you going? Over here. Where are you going? Over here. And he sees a bunch of kids running past.
Right.
And he opens the door, and he gets stuck in Xavier's physics.
Right, physics class.
He's like, "Good morning, Logan." And I like how we see the mutants all there. We don't know who all of them are, but I think it's
one was Kitty Pryde because she walks through the door.
But
right.
we kind of I like how we don't really see it. I mean, but Kitty Pryde. So he's like, "All right, class dismissed. I want you to get your paper to me on Tuesday about the hot and cold or something, some sort of physics thing." And he leaves, and Kitty Pryde says, "Oh, I forgot my bag," and then I think it phases through the door.
Right.
And then Xavier and Logan meet for the first time, and I kind of look at now. What do you think of that kind of relation? This is kind of spawning the relationship that you're gonna see more of,
right,
in Logan. So, what was your thoughts on there?
I liked it. Logan or Wolverine is not super trustful, but he's just somewhat interested in unlocking his past, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of liked, and I liked how he's like, "Do you want, Professor?" And what I liked is Wolverine or Logan is so like, not the movie but the character. He's just like, "Where am I? What am I doing?" And Professor Xavier's like, "Do you want some breakfast?"
Right.
And he's like, "Where the hell am I?" And he's like, "New York. My people brought you here. I need you to be safe from Magneto." And Wolverine's like, "What's a Magneto?"
Right.
And I like that thing. And then Cyclops and Storm come in, and then you see the budding relationship that you kind of see in the animated series. You remember in the...
I guess I can't remember I guess it's sort of the same where Cyclops and Wolverine don't get along that well.
Don't get along, and Wolverine kind of wants to do his own thing, kind of thing.
Yeah, I know that, yeah. He's sort of been a lone wolf.
The lone wolf. And he's like, Cyclops, and he says, "Cyclops and Storm saved you." And he says, "Cyclops." And he clicks his tongue and says, "Cyclops." And then he says, "What do they call you, Wills?" Because he's in a wheelchair.
Right.
I liked how Logan doesn't really take this serious enough, or doesn't say, And I think I do have to say that at the time, that I feel like X-Men was the first movie to really start taking it seriously.
Yeah.
For like an actual something that people knew of. I would say Blade, but I've kind of like on our Blade review, I kind of felt like Blade kind of works as both a comic book movie and a horror vampire movie as well. So I liked how he's like, it's all been 15 years, hasn't it, Logan? Running away, knowing who and what you are, and Logan is, and I like how that kind of will take kind of. I think that's the reason why X-Men Origins is set in the 80s, right? Because of that. Now that I've kind of watched it, right. So what do you think of Mutant? So he says, "What is this place?" And we get sort of the exposition of Mutant High or Xavier Academy. Let's talk about that. What was your thought? I mean, I guess before I start, I didn't want to interrupt you or saying,
Yeah.
like, I liked how this was a school. Because if you think about it in the comics and in the television series, it's a school for gifted youngsters, but it's never really shown as a school. It's just more of like, this is our hangout spot. This is our command center.
Right.
Kind of thing. But we really see a school, and I liked how he says, you see the anonymity and you see the guy that can, like, I guess, shift from place to place, or like...
He's playing basketball.
Yeah, and he's like, hey, no powers!
Right.
And like there's a kid running on the water. I would have liked to have seen more, and I don't know if there's an extended cut of X-Men, but more, just a tiny... Would you wanted to see a little bit more of the school, or do you feel like it just...
No, I feel like, they just sort of take away from the other parts of the story.
Yeah, I could see that. Maybe, I think you would probably do that if you had like a live action show.
Yeah,
anything,
essentially,
that kind of thing. And then what I liked is you see, and I like how he says, he kind of explains, because I think the other thing that X-Men, the movie, has to do is it has to balance it out, where it has to kind of go, explain what mutants is to someone who's like, what the hell is an X-Men comic book?
Right.
But also be like, for the fans kind of thing,
right.
What was your thoughts on Mutant High? I mean, did you like the idea of it being like an actual school, or?
Yeah, I think they did a good job. Showing a couple scenes of them in classrooms, and it gives people a lot of stuff, like try to guess the mutants, and it shows some stuff with.
And
Iceman.
Well, Iceman, I like how it's Pyro. We see Pyro,
right?
Who like kind of has a lighter and turns a flame ball,
right?
And then Iceman
freezes it,
and
right.
I think in and then drops it, and she's like, John, and I think in a deleted scene of this movie, there is a scene where Kitty Pryde and Jubilee have a conversation about Drogue.
Right.
I can't remember exactly. I would probably, if we had did more time on this, I would want to go into details of what the deleted scenes would have said. But I do remember there's a deleted scene where, they have an interaction. Then it's not just a cameo.
Right.
I liked and I like the and then Iceman kind of has sort of the hots for
Rogue,
and I didn't know to this at the time, but he talks
made a flower,
makes the rose, and I thought
right.
I couldn't tell it was a rose until seeing it at lunch later, kind of thing. And then he talks about the lower level. He talks about we see. I think he talks about how Scott and Storm were their first mutants.
Right.
And I think Beast was his first one too, because in the third one, Beast says he's in the suit. He's like, "Oh, my old uniform."
Okay.
But in this one, Beast is in it, and I think he's having a conversation like
on one of the TVs. I think
on one of the TVs, and he's not turned into a blue guy. So there's a continuity error right there. So anyway, he talks about the lower level, like Scott's talking about motorcycle things, and so there's a little bit of a home ec thing, and he talks about the lower levels, and we get to see the Blackbird. What were your thoughts on seeing the Blackbird seeing it for the first time, or seeing it live action?
Gotcha. I guess I wasn't
impressed.
Yeah, unfortunately, but
I don't know. I think because there's so much. I felt like this movie. Watching it again, it's kind of had the same thing that the X-Men 1980s thing. It had so much to cram in,
right? That
it was sort of like, you can't really, it had so much to cram in that it didn't have enough time to really breathe. I mean, breathe, but it didn't it was like, okay, we got to get through this, got through this. So anyway, he talks about his friend Rogue. And how she'd never be able to touch another human being. And and I kind of like how Bobby and Rogue start a relationship, which we'll see in the second and third one as well.
Yeah.
So where was that?
What? I guess does Rogue get stabbed?
No. Hold on.
Or do we hop over to Senator Kelly?
Senator Kelly's on the. He's talking to Mr. Gyrick. Henry Gyrick on the plane. He's on the plane, and everyone, there's like kind of a crowd. Like he's got a limo and escorts, and there's a lot of people that and there's not really like I would have kind of liked. Would be interesting to see is more of a side between maybe people that were interested in Jean Grey, or for mutant, living among us and having being the good side of it, let's say.
Right.
But if you look at the when he's getting on his plane, it says Mr. Mutant, and they have like things hanging in signs and everywhere, and he gets on and he talks to Henry Gyrick. Now Henry Gyrick is in. Remember when we talked about X-Men, the pilot episode?
Vaguely, yeah.
Remember, he comes over to Jubilee's house and
does he talk with the parents and stuff?
Talks to the parents. He's got the sunglasses.
Okay.
So that's kind of his cameo, is where he kind of says, what about the UN Summit? And I like that line, UN Summit, the whole world will be watching. And Senator Kelly says, "We're Americans, Henry. Let the rest of the damn world deal with mutants in their own way." And I kind of think that was interesting. That it would be. I think it's fascinating if we made a live action TV series of how the other nations treated mutants, or maybe that would have not been a deleted scene. That would have been kind of interesting to see just for the fans. So anyway, we get to see the reveal of Mystique. Right. Do you want to talk about that, Jay?
Right. I think she might be my favorite
X-Men.
Well, not like villain. Besides Magneto. I think her character had the best sort of like story arc and design. Even though she doesn't say anything, just sort of like the otherworldliness of her character and how she moves and fights and stuff.
Yeah, and I liked how because I think in the comics she's actually Rogue's stepmother. Okay. And Nightcrawler's real mother. And when we get to see X2, there's a really good scene between kind of a small kind of nod to that. But he's like going, the whole world would be watching. And then Senator Kelly looks over at the ocean. He's like, "Where are we going?" And then I love the sunlight. Right. So he's kind of sitting there, and the sunlight comes down, and we see Rogue or Mystique's reveal, and he's like, "Where are we?" And it's not like, and it sort of slowly develops, and then we get Mystique's semi backstory, because there's a line where he's like, "Pilot," and she kicks him. And says, "You were the reason why I was so afraid to go to school as a child." So that was kind of an interesting thing. And she, knocks him out, and that was one of my favorite sort of Mystique scenes. And then she gets on the cockpit, and I'd never noticed this until I watched it maybe the fourth time. Toad is the pilot. Right. I did not notice that because I always thought that I didn't know who that guy was. Because I didn't kind of put two and two together. Right. The Toad is kind of flying them to Magneto's base. Right. Which is in the comics Asteroid M. Because I think he's got like a space base. He... And then... Senator Kelly wakes up and... He's like, "Where am I? What am I doing here?" And what I liked is what I thought was interesting was he's like, "Oh, Senator, I'm here," and Magneto shows himself. Right. And I like how he says, you're here, me and my kind, the Brotherhood of Mutants. Now, here's the other thing I wanted to say. In the comics from like the 60s to maybe the 70s, is they called themselves the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants.
Uh-huh.
But they've been kind of trying to retcon that, I think, in the comics.
Right. Yeah, it's more interesting to have the more gray.
It's more interesting, and I think it's also doesn't really sort of like, it shows Magneto isn't exactly like, ha 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 ha.
Right.
I'm evil. What do you think of like Magneto's base?
I was not the biggest fan. It was just sort of so much cheesy.
Sort of
like with all them sort of like had their arms crossed, like sort of generic, like villainous. It was,
no, like not planned, but no, his base.
Yeah, I just wasn't. It was sort of like just.
It's like, here's my lair. Here's my lair. Ha ha ha. You know, it's kind of like someone saying, step into my office, and they go around the corner. I thought it was cool. I thought it was kind of a nice sort of like James Bondy kind of thing,
right,
in a way. Senator Kelly is basically saying, "Where's Henry?" And he's like, "Mr. Gyrick's been dead for many." So we must have known that Mystique or Magneto and Mystique killed Henry.
Right, we found out it was Sabretooth at the end of the movie, because it said he seems like he was mauled by a bear.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's
Sabretooth.
Sabretooth.
That makes sense. Makes sense. So Sabretooth kills...
and Mystique took his place.
And he's like... and I like that line where he says, you know, what's your thoughts on God? You know, and he's like... And he talks about how I always thought God was a teacher, a giver of life. You know, and it was... sort of, I mean, I like how they deal with religion, but they don't, you know.
Oh, where he's like, you shouldn't fear God, you should fear me.
Fear me kind of thing.
Yeah.
And not anymore. And then he's like, what are you doing? He says, let's just say God works too slow. And so he starts this
evil device,
and it turns Senator Kelly
into a mutant.
And I like how it works because I like how it builds up.
Right.
Because it starts spinning, and then slowly builds up, and then what happened after that?
Then he sort of have Senator Kelly back in his little holding cell, and he sort of like squeezes through the bars.
Oh yeah. And we don't go back to the.
I forget the exact time. Eventually, go back and forth, and they find out more about Wolverine. Like he has his metal skeleton.
Jean Grey and Cyclops. Jean Grey and Cyclops and Professor X talk about how his metal skeleton is all, you know, kind of built,
right?
And how is he able to survive that? And it's just exposition to people who have no idea what X-Men Wolverine is, and then it's just he's like. Fascinating, and I like how Professor X in that scene says, "I would, you know, somebody who would want to hurt, mutant experimentation. Right. It's not uncommon. It's very uncommon." And so, I like how it's such a great like visual. So we see Senator Kelly. He's kind of in a jail cell, and he's next to the bars. And instead of going, "Let me out," he slowly moves his hands or his head
sort of
through
squishes
the bars and squishes through, and then he gets it stuck, and then he's like, and then he escapes, and then Magneto shows up and he's walking across the room, and he's saying, "Where are you?" And he opens the gate, and I like how he makes a bridge.
You're right, with all the metal plates flying
I like how he like makes the bridge in the metal plates, and I like, you know, which if you remember in like the animated stuff, he always had a ball of like magnetism,
right?
And he would have a ball, or he would have the magnet, or he would
he sort of flew
in this one, and he flies in this one a little bit,
but not as much.
Yeah. So he makes the bridge, and he comes over, and he says, "Hello, Senator. How was your sleep?" And Senator Kelly's like hanging on the thing. He's like, "What'd you do to me?" It's like, "Senator Kelly,
You're one of us now.
You're one of us now. And then he's like, will you help? It's kind of that, Scar, brother, help me.
Right. And
then Sabretooth grabs him by the arm.
It sort of turns like Stretch Armstrong.
Stretch Armstrong,
slips out.
Slips down. And then we get Stanley, or then I'm trying to think. Then does Bobby show up?
Oh
or
no, we
Bobby's
have
Mystique.
Yeah, so like
or is that where we're at? I can't
sort of. Yeah, I think it cuts back. I think Wolverine's having a nightmare.
Okay, Wolverine's having a nightmare.
Right.
And he's like, huh. And this was a nice scene where we get to finally see his, I mean, not a nice scene, but so Wolverine's having a nightmare, and we get to see his experimentations, which will kind of go into more detail in X2.
Right.
He basically having a nightmare, and Rogue hears him, goes up to Rogue, and Logan tries to wake Logan up.
Uh-huh.
And Logan kind of stabs her, and you see, the way it's worked, the way it animate, or the way it's worked, or
claws poking through
her, and he's like, and she's, which of course she would be,
right?
And he's like, somebody help, and she grabs him by the ear.
Yeah, I think it just touches his face.
His face, and you see kind of the veins come up.
Right.
And you can heal her.
Right.
And then the whole school shows up.
Yeah.
And we see Xavier and
Storm and Cyclops and Jean Grey.
And I want to cut to one thing. I do like Jean. There is that relation. I wanted to talk about. So Jean, beforehand, Jean shows Wolverine his corridors. And I like how that's that moment, because you kind of see in at least the first two, there's sort of a love triangle between, which you see in the book, in the comics, or in the animated series,
right,
as well. And so he's like going, so what's your power? Putting up with that guy? And he's like, no, I have telepathic and telekinesis. He's like, what can you move? What kind of things can you move? And he opens the closet doors, and says, all kinds of things, and shuts them, and then he says, read my mind. And so we get kind of more of she reads his mind.
Right.
And then it is that sort of, Scott kind of shows up and says, are you going to stay away from my girl? And he says, well, if I did that, you wouldn't be my girl. She went, and it's that kind of love triangle. It's kind of building on that love triangle that at least we kind of know, so it's not like it's just showed up. So anyway, Wolverine is in the infirmary, and Professor X shows up and says, I'm just letting you give you some.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, they're checking on Wolverine, and sort of cuts away, and Bobby comes over to Rogue and says,
and I like how Bobby is sort of like, you never lose your mutant's power on another mutant.
Right.
And she's like, but I just borrowed his powers. And I like how, and I think Sean Astin played a great Iceman.
Right.
Even though we don't really see him turn into ice until 3.
Right.
But I like how he sort of, he's got more to do in the sequel, but I like how he's not a throwaway secondary character. He's got, in
this movie it
is, but when he has that conversation with Jean, or with Rogue, and he says, you should never use your powers on another mutant, and she's like, no, I just borrowed his powers. And she says, Professor Xavier is mad at you, and she says, and it's that kind of like, it is that Scar Simba moment where he's like, run, Simba,
right,
run away and never return. And so she escapes, and then we see the eyes.
Yeah, it was Mystique the whole time.
So then she runs away. Mystique ends up going to Xavier's Cerebro.
Right.
And sabotages it by poisoning it with
green stuff.
And Professor X says, "Where's Rogue?" And he's like, "She's gone. She's ran away to the train station." And he uses Cerebro to find her at the train station.
Yeah, and so Wolverine sort of takes off on his own to go find her and steals Cyclops' motorcycle to get there first. And then
and I like how he's like riding the motorcycle and he hits the button and the turbo.
Oh, it had like a boost button.
Face boost button. And I like how Cyclops says, "Where's my motorcycle?"
Right.
And I feel like Cyclops in this movie, he's got character, but he doesn't have the leadership.
No, they don't.
He kind of gains it a little bit in the second one.
I've heard a lot of people sort of complain about Cyclops' portrayal in these movies. Yeah.
So,
it sort of makes Logan or Wolverine sort of takes center stage pretty much throughout these.
But I feel like Cyclops is a lot more stronger character
in the shows and comics. Yeah. And then we see sort of Wolverine shows up and sort of talks to Rogue and gets her to come back. But I did like how they're sort of like from then on, whenever it's like two mutants just by themselves, you're like never quite sure if it's like, is that Mystique? Like,
I mean,
there's always sort of like an air, it's like suspicions, like, wait, is this Mystique trying like doing something?
Yeah,
weird?
but like Mystique goes into Xavier.
So she's not there. She's down sabotaging Cerebro,
and she takes like this poison stuff,
right?
And it's blue, and it turns into green, and then Rogue So
then Cyclops and Storm show up to the train station.
But like, I like how they show up to the train station, but I like how Logan shows up and says, "Where is she?" And she's like, "Jean, she's gone." Well, I mean, but I like that line. I guess where I was going with. I like that line where he goes, "Logan, where are you going?" Or what are you gonna do? I'm going the traditional way. Look, how are you gonna find her? Or how are you gonna find her? I'm gonna do the traditional way. Look, and that's just so like there's something about the quips that you kind of now watching it you get sort of a lot better, a lot more. And so Jean or Cyclops and Storm go to the train station, and Cyclops. I like that. There's that, and so Storm's going up to talk to her. Like, she's 17 years old. She looks like this. She's wearing this. Wearing a green cape. And then there's that kid with his mother, and he sees Cyclops. He's wearing his visor, and you kind of can say that the visor is kind of like when you look at when like a little kid, because when a little kid looks at somebody with like a prosthetic arm or something, it's sort of like, don't look at the arm, kind of like as she looks at him and he just smiles at him, and his mom's just like, don't stare, walk away. And I kind of like that scene just because that shows us kind of where the prejudice is. Right. I mean, it's subtle. I think it's not as subtle. It's not as in the film they don't emphasize on it. Where in the TV show there's like the IMU whatever. Remember those guys?
No.
Where they're like they're more of like mutant haters kind of thing.
Gotcha.
But so we finally get to see. So Storm is like going. She's 7 years old. 17 years old. She's got describing her to the train station guy, and we get to see Sabretooth, who is just such a what word am I looking for? He's
like a brute, sort of.
He's a brute, but he has no character.
No, not in this one.
Not in this one. He doesn't. But this is kind of his only until he fights Wolverine, his really only like big scene where he's like he pushes people around, pushes people out of the way, and grabs
Storm by the
throat, and he puts her down. And he says, "Scream for me!" Right. And I always love that scene. As a kid, I mean, I don't love it, but I was like one of my kind of like favorite Sabretooth scenes, and then pushes her on the thing, and I think I was watching it with the commentary, and I think the director said, I think maybe the second and third take, he actually, gave her a little bit of a bruise, on the
wall, the
wall,
window.
the window, and then I like how, and then I like how she starts to sort of storm up, and her eyes get misty,
right?
And his hair gets a little
stands up. Yeah, after Toad steals Cyclops' glasses, and
no, Toad, and he's looking around, and then you're right. So you want to get to Toad because that was a pretty cool
so you
scene.
briefly catch Toad just for like a second or two doing like a weird creepy spider walk up the walls.
Oh yeah, I didn't notice the walk. And then he's up there
right before this happens,
and then Cyclops is looking around, and Toad.
Well, Cyclops goes to help Storm, but then Toad steals his glasses.
No, he takes his tongue.
Yeah, and steals Cyclops' glasses.
Well, he breaks his glasses. He throws his glasses off.
Yeah, he just takes them.
Throws his glasses off, or his visor off, and you see his beam, and now we can understand why he can't control his beam.
Right.
Because of the way it's because he blows a hole into the ceiling of the train station.
Right.
And I kind of liked the train in the train station. Okay, so I liked how we get to see him do his optic blast.
Right.
And it looks kind of like what it would look like if he takes off his optic blast. And then Storm electrocutes the Sabretooth.
Right.
And Sabretooth flies all the way back into the signs that say where the trains are going.
Right.
And then
I think it sort of cuts away from them, and we see Magneto shows up to the train, sort of rips the train apart.
Oh yeah. Well, I liked how Xavier or Wolverine shows up and says, "Why don't you give these guys give them a break? They could,
Yeah, I'll protect
you." They have
you.
a moment because I think, throughout the entire film, Logan and Rogue. It's really Logan's and Rogue's story.
Yeah.
At least in this first one, and then it becomes so centric on Logan.
Right.
And the X-Men and or at least the second one.
Yeah, it's mostly Wolverine throughout these. Yeah,
I know, except for X-Men First Class, but
right.
So I kind of so he's like, why don't you give these guys a break? And I like how she tells him like the first boy I ever kissed, I put him in a coma for 6 weeks, and then I think it's kind of creepy when you hear her say, I can still feel him in my head.
Right.
And
I think it's just she absorbs more than just
their life force.
Yeah.
And then, so then he's like, "Why don't you give these guys a break?" And then the train starts moving, and then they're like, "Okay," and then it stops, and then Magneto shows up and says, "I have an evil plan that I'm," But I thought it was pretty cool that we get to see like the way he shows up,
right?
And it kind of, it kind of reminded. I think it was kind of a look at the ball, like it kind of looks round. When he opens the train,
right?
And then Logan kind of gets up and defends Rogue,
right?
And then, but Magneto, master of magnetism, claws him and says, "You have all the metal in your body," and
so he just throws him
away. He's like, "What do you?" But I like how, but which is kind of how he kind of says, "What do you want from me?" He's like, "What do I want? Why do you think it's all about you, Wolverine?"
Right.
Which is kind of like you watch it now and go, "Is that a knock to the series of how it's all about Logan?"
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
But they really wanted Rogue the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. So Rogue, and then so Rogue runs away. He takes a syringe and knocks her in the head.
Right.
And sends her to and takes her to
their secret base. Yeah.
So,
and then they sort of the X-Men sort of regroup back, and this is where Professor X gets, they've sabotaged Cerebro.
Yeah, and it's kind of like he uses it, and And did we talk about Cerebro?
A little bit, yeah, but not.
The fact that I liked how Cerebro showed all the people around,
Right.
and then you see the mutants are kind of more in like color.
I don't know if it happens on this one. I think it's
no.
the future
Well,
ones.
I know in the
the next ones they do like sort of the red and
the
blue.
red and blues,
right.
yeah. But this one, I think, like, but you know, when he finds Rogue,
right,
he basically he like it sort of lights
up. Yeah,
she's the only one, and then it blows out. So anyway, Professor Xavier's using it since it's got gook in it.
right.
He, failure, and he falls out of his chair and passes out. And then there's this. So then they put him in and he's got all these like
electrodes on his head.
And I like how there's this moment between Cyclops.
Oh, and Jean.
No, Cyclops and Professor X.
Oh, where he's
like going, "You're like a father to me," and I'm like going, "Okay, since I know the comics, yes, but you kind of didn't really spend that,
They don't got time, Steve. They got
time. I mean, it does feel
no one wants a 4-hour movie.
Well, I know it does feel like they had to kind of explain. It did feel like it kind of explained it so much too.
Right.
And so but then it's kind of a nice moment between.
Right.
So then Senator Kelly shows up.
Oh, right, coming back all mutated.
Mutated and stuff, and it's like, is there a doctor in the house?
Right.
And then, I love this scene. So he's on the operating table, and I think am I messing 3 scenes up?
I think I'd forgotten about the scene. This happened a little bit before Professor X.
Professor X gets the...
Yeah, because he was still there, yeah.
So,
but you're right, we missed this one.
So he basically goes in and...
he was afraid of like the normal hospitals.
And he's like, "Is there a doctor?" And then Storm goes and talks to
Kelly,
and he holds his hand. And it's like, "Do you hate people?" And then he turns in the water, and I love she's holding his hand, and it bursts like a balloon, and then he turns in the water, and she goes, "Senator Kelly's dead," and then he goes to Cerebro. So
right,
yeah. So anyway, Xavier's basic. So Jean says, "You know what? Screw it. I'm going to. I can try my hand at Cerebro."
Right. She
because
it.
Xavier.
Right.
Wolverine said, "Have you tried Cerebro before?" And she's like, "No, he's much too powerful." But she tries it, and she then finds out what Magneto's doing with Senator Kelly.
Right.
Or with with Rogue, so then they get back into action.
I can't. Wow, a sidebar. Is this what triggers the Phoenix? Her use of Cerebro. Does that happen later?
That's the 2.
Okay, I wasn't sure if this was like what caused because I know like President was like mental blocks in her.
No, that's
stop.
2.
Okay, that's 2.
That's
Okay,
2 because 2 goes into 3.
We'll see that next week.
Yeah, we'll see that next week. So anyway, they basically go into the house. They go into the
planning room has that cool little table.
Table that I think somebody said it was like it's like those. Remember those space things?
Right.
And it kind of reminded me of that. And he says, Ellis Island, the mutants are going, or Magneto's going to use the
Statue of
Liberty to change everybody.
His mutant ray.
His mutant ray. And he says, the best way we can get through is here. And he talks about the Blackbird. He's like, if you want to catch our jet, they're going to have to find us.
Right. The main thing is that really cool table.
Yes. So anyway, and then I like how so they end up going to so they get on the plane.
Right.
And I love this is one of my favorite lines is he says, "Do you really go out in this black leather?" And he says, "What do you?" And Cyclops says, "What would you prefer, leather or yellow spandex?" Which is a nice nod,
right?
Which is I kind of think is interesting because.
But I would have preferred yellow spandex, Steve.
Yeah,
add some color.
If you've seen the Wolverine, there's the alternate ending where he gets the I think red and.
Oh, that suit. Okay, yeah.
I mean, they show him in the thing, but see Deadpool. He's gonna be in the yellow suit.
Right.
It's gonna be awesome. So they fly to see Magneto.
Right.
In the
Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty, and the Coast Guard. He's hijacked a Coast Guard's trip.
Right.
He's Sabretooth has taken down the guards.
Right.
And he's used the Statue of Liberty as sort of the kind of fun about it. And this kind of reminds me of like a final battle between like kind of like the last level in like an X-Men video game for the movie.
Right.
And so they go through the gift shop.
Right.
So the gift shop is like, it's pretty cool. And what I love, there's another, I like how he adds a little bit of fun to it. So they walk into the gift shop, and the first thing, the metal detectors go off. Right. And he takes the claws and breaks it. Then he does the middle claw. Right. And I like how, I love how Cyclops just kind of smiles at him. Right. It's a joke. And then Mystique's there, disguised as the Statue of Liberty. Right. Fights Wolverine, which is Wolverine in an awesome fight. Right. And I love how, I'm gonna get your thoughts first, but what I liked about it was like they roll around, they fight, and then you can see the claw, like Wolverine's like taking down his doppelganger, and you can see the claws are just fading away. Her claws.
Oh yeah, he was able to cut through her claws. Yeah, and she sort of screams because it's part of her body. Yeah.
But she has this really cool like roundhouse kick.
Right. She knows like kung fu
she roundhouse kicks Logan or Wolverine, and what was your thoughts on that fight?
I liked it. I sort of like. This is what I said. I think Mystique is my favorite. Yeah, it's pretty fast, and it sort of just adds a bit. I don't know if you've seen like the thing where like people don't know like, are you a real person or are you like
who's who? Well, there is that line where he says, "Wait," and then they close the door. So that kind of and pisses off Cyclops. Right. So okay. So they have a fight, and there's that kick, and then Mystique. Then he kind of No, he doesn't stab Mystique. He kind of fights her off and kind of goes to the next level.
Yeah, and they sort of I don't know if we want to go over in detail. They sort of fight off Toad.
Toad is a cool fight. Yeah. Because like Toad does this like, so Toad and Toad is fighting Storm and
Jean Grey.
Right. He basically. So he lunges after Jean Grey, and then Jean Grey kind of stops him, and he
just like spits
his like acid and shit, and then she kind of is like Velma without her glasses and walks around.
She can't breathe.
She can't breathe either. So anyway,
Yeah, then sort of like then Toad is fighting Storm, and Storm sort of like blows him, is like blowing him off the Statue of Liberty, and he sort of like is able to use his tongue to hold on.
And then Storm's like, but I like how Storm is basically, or when he fights Storm, he does this like kind of dance first, right? And then like Storm breaks the glass and says, and he's like, "Why don't you pee?" Or he pushes her. Die? He pushes her down the
elevator shaft first. Yeah,
the shaft first. She uses her electricity, which is a pretty cool scene. Yeah, where she's using her electricity or her storm powers, and she's like, "Do you know what happened?" And then she blasts Storm, or Storm blasts Toad into the water, but he kind of grabs on. He uses his tongue to grab onto the railing
for a second,
and says, "You know what happens to a toad?" This was a stupid line. She says, "You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to us, to anything else." And then, she basically, or he falls into the river, and then Storm goes and it's like Storm comes back, it's like, "Okay, I just took down." It's kind of like they're taking down each character as they go. Right. So Storm takes down Toad, finds Wolverine, and she's like, "Logan, we need to regroup." And he's like, "Something's not right here." what is it? He turns around to Storm, stabs her, and says, "You're not part of the group." And we find out that Storm is actually Mystique.
Yeah.
And she's, ah!
Right.
And then Wolverine goes, sees Cyclops and Jean, and Cyclops starts to turn on his thing, and he's like, whoa, 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 and Wolverine's like, whoa, 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 it's me. He's like, prove it. Says, you're a dick. And he's like, fair enough. And then, so they go to the statue.
Yeah, they sort of climb up the statue and then suddenly Wolverine can't move, and that's when Magneto shows up.
And that was a pretty cool. And then each of the villain, and this is what I call in a lot of movies villain time,
right?
Where it's just sort of like we're kind of like, okay, we're kind of, the villain's gonna do is kind of monologue,
yeah.
And he kind of puts all of them, like traps them together using the metal. He puts Storm and Cyclops, or no, Jean and Cyclops together. Storm is around, Storm has something around her neck, and anyway. So they're basically
sort of tied up,
or chained up, and Wolverine's like, you better, or Magneto's like, you better put those things away, and has to put Wolverine's claws kind of in his chest,
right? And
oh yes, and then Cyclops is like, storm fry him. And Magneto says, oh yes, a bolt of lightning and a copper conductor, kind of, he knows his stuff.
Right.
And he's like going, and then he says his master plan is to give the hero, or basically, I'm going to turn everybody in New York a mutant.
Right.
Or at least Ellis Island.
Yeah, all the dignitaries from the UN.
And then I like how he says, and I like how he does, there's something poetic. Not poetic, but just the way Ian McKellen and Magneto, as a villain, says it. He's like, America was when he's taking her on the train or on the boat. He says America was a world of tolerance, of peace.
Right.
And he says, no, it's not more about tolerance and peace. It's it's about prejudice, all that kind of stuff, prejudice and stuff. But anyway, so he does his thing. Rogue is trapped in there, and then he says, this is my master plan. And Wolverine says, if you were so righteous, you'd be up there, wouldn't you? Or if you're so righteous, why don't you do it? And there is that sort of, and I think that is kind of a badass line when you think about it.
Right.
But anyway.
So like Magneto goes up and sort of transfers his powers to Rogue, and that's when Wolverine sort of like stabs through himself, and then he breaks free,
and then he uses Jean uses her powers to get Cyclops's visor back.
Right.
Cyclops's visor back, and then it blasts his chain, or frees them, and then he says, Storm, can't you get me up there?
Right.
It's like, I can't just use me. And so he gets up there. He does this awesome like Tony Hawk handstand,
right?
And goes around the statue and then stands up. And
right. Yeah, that was during his brief. They have a brief fight. It doesn't really
fight, but it's awesome
with a plot with Sabretooth to get him out the way. But that was one of the cool scenes when he does like that. Cool.
Yeah, so he fights Sabretooth on the
Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, and it's a pretty cool fight.
Yeah,
and then he tries to free
Rogue,
and Magneto kind of stops him, and his claws get a little bit magnetized.
Right,
and then
Cyclops says he has a shot, but Jean tells him not to take it.
Right, and then
do you think that was Jean talking or Professor X talking through Jean?
I don't know. It could be. So I mean, and then he turns the lights. He says, "Take it." Wolverine kind of frees
It's sort of like cuts through the device.
Cuts through the device. It stops the device. Rogue.
But Rogue is dead.
And then Rogue and Wolverine hug, and it's this kind of moment because I feel like one thing is they're together throughout this entire. I mean,
right.
no, they're together throughout this entire franchise.
Right.
I'm surprised that Rogue wasn't. Kind of part of Logan.
Right.
You know. So Logan is so he cuts through the chains. He hugs Rogue. This brings Rogue back to life because
right.
of his healing powers.
Right.
And that's how she gets her streak of hair.
Right.
So it's not old age. You're just
right.
Yeah. So then I like how they
head back to they get back to the mansion.
They get back to the mansion.
Right.
Mystique's still alive.
Right, because she disguised herself as a cop. Yeah.
No, she disguised herself as a cop. Right.
Right.
And then they're at the mansion. Jean Grey tells Xavier that we won. And
we see Senator Kelly's back.
Senator Kelly's back, and Senator Kelly's Mystique because he's holding his chest.
Well, then we see like a brief, like her eyes
flash, and he says, I was wrong, and I'm going to rechange the mutant registration, which is something that he does in the sequel because he talks to Brian Cox's character.
Gotcha.
So Logan leaves, says goodbye to Ray, Rogue.
Right, because they tell him about like the secret base.
Secret base in Alkaline Lake, which will be the first part of part 2.
Right.
And then Magneto, and I like that moment. So Magneto goes to see Xavier goes to see Magneto in his bubble prison.
Right.
And I like how they're going. Did you ever get that foolish law passed? What do you think about this guy coming in? I'm always worried about the guy coming in for trouble. And he says, you remember that he played chess,
right? Yeah.
And it's a nice moment. Because I think chess is really interesting involved in this whole trilogy. Because in this third one, he uses it he finds out his magnetism powers coming back.
Oh, right. Wobbling the chess piece.
A little bit. So they have chess, and he says, "I will always be there, old man." And then the film ends. Right. Not like that, but it's
I know. I wish they'd used the music.
I know, but they probably couldn't get the rights.
It would have been good, like when they first took off in the jet or something.
Yeah.
To have it.
So Jay, what was your final thoughts on this? Watching it now,
do you watching
feel like
this,
it holds up.
I think so. I think it's still a pretty good movie.
I think so too. I think because, I think it's a pretty good movie. I think Wolverine or Hugh Jackman's perfectly. I think Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart is perfectly cast.
I'd like Ian McKellen too.
I think they're all perfectly cast.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Cyclops is a little bit. Cyclops was a little bit kind of.
I don't think it was the casting though. I think it's just
the writing.
Right.
I think the writing for Cyclops was a little bit.
And it's sort of their hard press because you can't. If every character is standing out, like none of them stand. It's sort of like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, but I think Bryan Singer did a good job because he really brought. Because he came from the usual suspects.
Yeah.
He can kind of really balance everyone out. But I want to say this. I think this was like my favorite. Not my favorite X-Men movie, but my favorite. I think my favorite comic book. Not my all-time favorite comic,
right.
But it's probably 3 or 2.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like The Dark Knight and maybe X-Men and maybe X2. But I love this movie. I give it a 9 out of 10. What would you give it?
Maybe
not a 9 out of 10.
Maybe 8.5. It's good.
It's good. I think 2 blows it a little bit out of the water.
Yeah, it's been a longer time since I've seen 2 too, so I'm excited to see it next week.
Yeah. So, as always, I'm Steve.
And I'm Jay.
And coming next is X2 with Nightcrawler. Bye. And as always, if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Peace.